Kevin's going to summarize, Kevin from CUPE, who's organized much of this thing, and then we'll open it up for another set of comments. Kevin?
Thanks, Greg. So thanks, Doug and Sam, for this. This, in some ways, is the culmination of this series, which has been, really rewarding to put together. And Sam suggested, as we were preparing for this session, that I might attempt to sort of draw together some of what we've heard about, and maybe if there's lessons or conclusions to be drawn, and ideally close with a few thoughts about some next steps or some strategic lessons, strategic steps that we might draw, not just from today, but from this whole series. So that's the sort of the tall order that I've been handed. But I kind of appreciate the suggestion, because I do have a few thoughts that I'd like to try to draw together. Before I do that, though, rather than leaving it to attack on at the end, because this is the last session, I would like to take just a moment for a few thank yous, a few acknowledgements for the whole series and sort of how it came about. And really, that's first and foremost to Greg and Sam. It was Greg's idea in the first place. I actually met with Greg in April talking about some of these issues, and he said, well, why don't you do a workshop at the Center for Social Justice? And as soon as he said it, I thought, well, yeah, that would be great. We could get Henwood and Jim Stanford and Sam Gindin and all these people. And then I thought, nah, they'll never come. They'll never participate. So it's fantastic that there has been such a level of interest from the participants and contributors, the panelists that have joined us. But also, I was surprised to find that there was more than 8 or 10 people interested in this subject. So that's really gratifying. Just quickly as well, Stephanie Ross and Mark Thomas from the Global Labor Research Center, thanks to them. And I want to give a special recognition as well to Kanche Stoikovsky, who is the staff person, coordinator for Center for Social Justice, also has played a key role in this series, recording these sessions and making them available online. I actually think that that's going to be a bit of a legacy of this, which will be very valuable. I've already heard from a lot of people who appreciate that. Okay. Some of what I was going to draw together has really been said very well by either Doug or Sam, so I'm going to cut what I had planned to say probably in half, which is great, because then we can maybe go back and have one more round of questions, as Greg says. If there's one thing I'd like to say before getting to the sort of the strategic, I have a 3-point strategic plan I'd like to share. But if there's one or 2 points to make before I get to that, it is these. What I find and have found so valuable about this series, and in some ways Doug's presentation today is probably the most sharp expression of this, is it really puts on the table this fundamental contradiction of attempting to organize this crucially important part of workers' compensation through a financial asset-backed fund from which payments will be made, knowing what those financial assets represent and how, the role they play in the economy. And this is something, I've worked on pensions for a number of years, and I've always felt sort of, been aware of this contradiction. And I've always been disturbed by the labor movement's ability to come to terms with it and even discuss it openly. We kind of avoid it. And I should say, as I mentioned, the labor movement, I work for CUPE. I think I've said this before. And what I say today, as before, does not necessarily represent the views of CUPE. They're my own views. But I would say that I certainly had enough conversations with colleagues and CUPE members and staff who do kind of see this contradiction, and they're uncomfortable too. And we have not managed to have a space or a forum to sort of talk this through, this contradiction. Let me refer back to a couple of the sessions and try to put a fine point on the contradiction that I just described, because I think we need to figure out ways to continue the discussion about it. One thing I'll just mention sort of quickly, I referred in our first session, people that were there might remember my reference to Peter Drucker's book from the 1970s, Pension Fund Socialism, The Unseen Revolution. I made the point quickly, but I didn't provide any citation. And I have a citation I want to share from his book that I think is really important and has implications for this contradiction. Drucker said in his book, "Every single pension contract implies a social responsibility on the part of business to produce a surplus adequate to support its former employees. This, in turn, demands understanding and support on the part of the employees of America, support for management and its responsibility for productivity. For management alone makes resources productive." That's, of course, Peter Drucker's business-oriented view. Management alone makes resources productive. But how can management create this understanding among workers and obtain the necessary support for its role on the part of its new owners? He's claiming that workers own all corporations now. Well, he answers the question. Business has to establish an effective relationship with its new owners, the workers, in order to protect its autonomy and with it the interest of these owners. In other words, business and management has to remain autonomous, and the workers have to understand and appreciate its autonomy and support its battle with what he calls rapacious governments, has to join us to oppose tax policies that are inimical to economic growth and performance, and against policies which are inflationary. In other words, the argument is, and he's anticipating, that this expanded presence of workers' pension funds in the capital markets and in control of companies is going to show and demonstrate to workers that they are really on the side of capital, of the business community. And in fact, he's excited about that. He thinks this is positive because in a way it's the end of class struggle. It's the end of a contradictory class relationship. I think that's really a fascinating window, and I want to connect that then forward through, just quickly, to what we discussed in the second session of our series, which talked about socially responsible investment and the different forms that takes, the UN principles of responsible investment, these various things, because in many ways this really reflects, I think, the dominant thinking and practice in the labor movement, and I will say including within CUPE and other unions that I work with. How does that school of thinking wrap their minds around this contradiction and this problem? Well, I want to provide a citation I think really captures so much. It's from a book, a collection of articles that is called Working Capital, the Power of Labor's Pensions. And one of the articles, this is a collection of writers who are talking about, really, this is an exciting opportunity for workers to gain these new powers, and it's sometimes talked about as a kind of a revolution in the power dynamic of the modern economy. The writer of this one piece is called The Labor Shareholder Revolution. And she writes, and I'm going to cite this, "Although pension power has the potential to revolutionize corporate governance, labor shareholder activism is politically feasible. Importantly, these strategies of labor shareholder activism do not require labor law reform, which is highly unlikely in the current political environment. In fact, as unions lose members, they lose political clout. And even under a Democratic administration, the national political climate does not favor unions." So she's saying, political voice of unions is weak. But in contrast, labor shareholder activism receives a large degree of bipartisan political support. Bipartisan meaning Republicans and Democrats all can live with this. Why? She says, because it does not fundamentally challenge the basic structure of U.S. capitalism. In fact, she adds, specifically, labor shareholder activism accords with strong beliefs in property rights and the faith that shareholders can address the policy concerns about corporations. Shareholders is the way to address our problems. Shareholding, active shareholders. I actually think that captures an awful lot about an entire school of thinking. which is influential in the current labor movement, and I think it's something we need to challenge, debate, and talk about. Skipping forward again to take this contradiction. The one most concrete issue or problematic that we talked about in this series, which really exposes the problem in my view, especially as a CUPE person, as a public sector trade unionist, was our session 4, where we talked about the increasing role of our own pension funds financing privatization through public-private partnerships. And I won't go over all that we took from that, but I'll just add a couple of, I guess, editorial comments. One thing that I have thought about a little bit, even since that session, is that really the privatization of public goods, public assets, crown corporations, that we are seeing is in many ways a kind of accumulation by dispossession. I think David Harvey even talks about it in those terms. This is the agenda, this is a key part of the agenda of neoliberalism, and pension funds are playing this key role around hospitals, schools, highways, nursing homes, retirement homes, and I'm sure, wait for it in the coming weeks, postal services. Easy to imagine. This is what happened in the Royal Mail a couple of months ago when the UK government sold off the Royal Mail. They emphasized that, oh no, but the new ownership will be good because it will be pension funds that will buy up those shares. And what is the labor movement doing about it in the UK? What are we doing about this here? At the very least, I would say not enough. I think this is far more important than what we've accorded to it. And to tack on this, likewise with private equity. There is this surge of investment from especially the largest funds in private equity corporations. What that means is pension funds are now buying direct ownership in companies. It's not buying shares anymore. It's direct ownership stakes where they run the company. Some of them own companies outright. And this is not... these are some of the most brutal corporations in the world, and they're union busting in many ways. And this is, of course, that's what finance capital is doing, as Doug says. But what do we think about our pensions being derived from that dynamic? Again, just to say, we haven't talked about it enough. I think both inside the labor movement and beyond, there is some very serious discussions that we need to have. And I think we need to talk about how to have that discussion. I mean, hopefully this workshop is an interesting start. So let me try to conclude with my 3 thoughts about strategies or directions to head. Number 1, the sort of the plan for a universal pension program, as Sam described it. I think this is a very exciting model, and it is an important alternative that would get us away from many of the problems that we have talked about: inequalities, inequities, underfunding, generational divides, all of the things that have already been discussed. It's a very inspiring and model, and it's an ambitious model that goes well beyond even the relatively ambitious plan of the Canadian Labour Congress for a doubling of the CPP. What Sam is describing is, well, let's go beyond that and maybe even consider other aspects of our lives that we could incorporate into that. Well, who would do that? My strategic proposal is that we need to actually start practically getting together in meetings to talk about what that would look like. We have to sketch that. What Sam has described is really a very rough, broad sketch. Who would be involved in that? How do we get that discussion rolling? I think that's a key issue. And as we have that discussion, this is still the first point, we need to just be very aware about, and this is something that Leo and others flagged, the inequities in the existing pensions, not just coverage, but also like who gets what, and the really harsh reality. People have mentioned the 2-tier solution that employers are jamming down our throats. We need to fight that, and I will say, again, this is a bit editorial, a lot of unions, a lot of people, they say we're going to fight that, but at a time of union weakness, it is very difficult, and in certain cases, it kind of becomes tempting, as an option. When an employer comes to a union leader and says, we will protect you and all your current members, and maybe even offer you a nice wage settlement if you just sign here on something that will rearrange the deal for, new hires. This is suicidal for the labor movement, and it's a terrible breach of intergenerational solidarity, and I would add cross-class solidarity. If our vision is to have all workers having decent pensions and decent compensation and lives, this is a disaster. We have to figure out ways to fight that. Number two, really tough question that I've never really known how to answer, and I know there's a couple of current CUPE named trustees in the room. What do we do if this is our vision and our goal is really quite a radical transformation? What do we do with the existing plans that we have, and in particular where we have succeeded in gaining trusteeship in some of these existing problematic plans? What do we tell them, and how do we operationalize that? I don't fully know the answer, but I guess I would say I think we need to, number one, no longer have illusions about what we're going to accomplish through those structures. That would be one important step, and talk openly about what those illusions are and how to move beyond them. And number two, I guess I'm not saying, not have these things anymore, but let's use those tools, those voices and platforms to try to minimize some of the damage and maybe facilitate some kind of positive alternative. So, the thing about P3s and privatization, let's come up with a plan for how we fight that more actively, both outside the plans and inside, if we have these voices. And then, I guess, the third point, I guess, really, it sort of relates, it just makes it more concrete. One of the things that really bothers me is that so much of this stuff happens, especially these most high-profile and ugly, vicious involvements of pension funds in some of these things. You hear about it afterwards, or it's much too late, or it's Porter Airlines, or any number of these other things, and no one's really watching. I actually think, and I'll throw this out, organized groups, unions, and maybe beyond the formally organized labor movement, we need to establish some sort of bodies or committees that have a mandate of watching and monitoring and examining what are these things doing, and if it's absolutely unconscionable, let's do something about it. The one thing I have to mention before closing, some of these major plans, especially OMERS, teachers, the others, the Caisse de Dépôt, CPP Investment Board, they're directly involved in this organization called the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships, the leading pro-privatization, pro-P3 lobby group in Canada. Our pension funds are involved in it. And one of them, I think it's no secret, OMERS, they actually sit on the board and finance the organization. We've got to come up with a way to challenge them and say, you can't do that anymore, when it flies so much in the face of the interests of public sector workers and, in fact, taxpayers and the broad public. We don't want our pension funds actually exercising political power to advance neoliberalism and privatization. We don't have a plan to do that, and we need one. And I guess that's it. That's a few thoughts of some steps we could take. And I'll just close maybe by thanking all of you who have been to one or more of these sessions. It's been really interesting. And thank you for coming. And maybe we can, I don't know if we have time for one last round.
Yeah,
so thanks, everybody.